Hey patrons, how's it going? I have a lot to get through in this video, but a lot of it's also going to be explained in the text along with this post. So don't feel like you have to watch the entire video if you don't have time right now or don't care about videos or anything like that. Before I dive into the mastering your photos and what I use as a mastering preset, I just want to go over a few things to catch you up on some upcoming posts. You probably know, if you saw a couple posts back, the live shoot from the workshop it ended up being captured and edited in a way that was much more like a highlight reel instead of a just long form experience of the shoot. So when I was in Hawaii for my workshop, I had two people and technically a third, myself, capture video from a bunch of different perspectives. So I had two different people with DSLRs and then myself with a GoPro video attached. And I'm not exactly sure how it's going to edit together yet, but it is going to be much, much longer, probably a 45-minute video, something like that. We'll see how it goes. But I just wanted to show you here on my screen a couple samples of the kinds of photos that I took at that workshop. I'm just scrolling through ultra fast the entire series of pictures. And obviously, this will make a lot more sense when you have a moving talking video explaining my thought process, how I'm getting them into poses and working through compositional ideas and stuff like that. So it was a really cool workshop. It was in a very difficult, narrow alleyway with the sun incredibly high overhead. I would say it was probably 3 o'clock. And this time of year in Hawaii, the sun is very unforgiving, which I really prefer for workshops, just as a way to learn. And there's the group. And then here's a sample of some of the videos that I have just finished downloading from the videographer that was there capturing some of this. So if it'll play. His massive bicep, whatever. Yeah. And then Mary, if you can kind of look down over your shoulder a little bit. Yep, that's beautiful. Good, good, good. See what we're working toward there compositionally. It's really nice. Momentum going. And you can imagine without explaining every shot that I do, this is like twice as fast. Some of the videos, but that'll be put together in an actual formal video. Before that, part 5 is going to be released. And that's going to be kind of the after the live shoot in Atlanta, what it looks like to import all my photos from a session or a wedding and go through the entire workflow and editing process. So that'll actually be released first. That'll be next week. I already have that ready to go. Yeah, so just be on the lookout for it. There's going to be a lot hitting in the next week and a half or so. The only catch is that I'll be out of town, so I'm hoping my internet will be decent, but you never know when you're traveling. Part 5 will certainly be up next week, and then hopefully right behind it will be the edited video from my workshop, just the live shoot portion, and then the final edited photos that I got from that. One other thing is, as I wrap sort of my own personal workshops for a little while, I'm not going to stop them forever, certainly, as I love doing them, but I have started, and this is the first place it is at all being announced anywhere on the internet. I've partnered up with Ryan Muirhead and Britta Bug, or Britta Slug, or she's got like a million different Instagram handles. I'm not really sure which one she prefers to go by. But we are starting a workshop called The Three Amigos. It's going to be very different than the way that I've done my own personal workshops, and it's going to be across maybe 2.5 days. We're thinking Toronto is going to be the first city that we do it, and it's really meant to be a very in-depth experience across, we're a strange collection of genres. You have me doing weddings, Britta doing self-portraits, and Ryan doing kind of fine art portraiture, working with models and friends and stuff like that. And it's a huge spectrum of genre, and I'm so excited to bring this blend and kind of get everybody there in an uncomfortable situation for themselves in terms of the live shoots that we're going to set up. If you're a wedding photographer, you maybe never photographed a model or done a fine art type of session before. Maybe if you are an editorial or fine art photographer, maybe you've never done self-portraits or you've never done weddings. So we're formulating all the details now, and there's going to be, of course, an awesome website and everything launched with more details. But in the meantime, there is a link that I'll include in this post that you can sign up if you just want more information about the first one that's being launched or any others in the future. So it's a pretty great I think concept. I'm super excited about it, and I just wanted to let you guys know first versus everywhere else on the internet. So let's jump into Lightroom and talk about what the heck a mastering preset or the process of mastering your photos even is. It's something that many photographers already do in some capacity and maybe don't really have a name attached to the process in some formal way. But it comes from, in my perspective, in my opinion, it comes from the concept of the audio world and the engineering world of music. You generally have all your different tracks mixed down in, a final left and right stereo mix. You then take that and you give it a lot of times to an entirely new engineer, and they take just the final stereo track and give it a global set of compression, EQ, leveling using a limiter, getting rid of a lot of dynamic range to maximize the loudness of the tracks. And it's this whole art form unto itself versus like the recording process or the mixing process or the performance. Mastering is its literal own thing. What I've done over the years, and particularly since switching it to the Canon EOS R, because the colors just seem to lend themselves really well to this process. What I've done is this. So I've imported 6 photos that we'll kind of work through. Everybody here probably has a baseline set of either presets or settings that you edit all your photos from. That makes sense. So I'm just going to go through, and in the part 5 version of my workshop video coming out next week, it'll go through the actual settings for my day in and day out editing that I'm doing now. It will do that in more detail. So don't worry too much that I'm glossing over what I'm doing in Lightroom. Don't worry about that. I'm just focusing on the mastering aspect of the photos. So you'll have your photos edited however you like using your own presets, tone curve, whatever. You're generally editing the raw files, I assume. If you're a professional and if you're here, you probably know that you should be editing from your raw files. And you end up in a state of whatever. You're happy with it. Maybe you're not. Editing is always sort of a moving target. But what is super interesting, and what I'm realizing is more and more critical, is to take your overall collection of images, apply maybe the same preset, apply a certain slightly varied version of your preset or settings or whatever it is. Get it all to where each photo looks as good as it's going to get by itself. And you're still stuck in a state that everything sort of can be a little detached. It's just not a cohesive visual voice. It's kind of all over the place. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that you are editing the raw file, which gives you, raw file captures a huge amount of color range. It saves as much color as possible versus something like JPEG, which is a lossy format that is discarding a lot of the color data. But something really interesting and magical happens from editing a JPEG file versus editing a RAW file. So again, once you've edited a full gallery or a session or whatever it is, you're left in this state, okay? You might be pretty happy with your edits. Here's where the mastering concept comes into play. I'll take all these images and I have a quick preset for, it's called Export JPEG Reimport. It's right here. All this does is export the raw files as JPEG files and then automatically add it back to the catalog, stacked above the original raw file at 100% JPEG quality, no sharpening, all metadata included. So all it's doing is making the raw file a JPEG and then re-importing it on top, stacked virtually on top of the raw file. Stacking, if you don't use it much or don't know what it is, it's just a method of organization. So if one file is virtually stacked on top of another and you select all images, it'll only export what is on top of that stack. You can expand the stack and still access everything, but from a kind of keeping things tidy and organized, I highly recommend you use stacking if you do this mastering approach. Great. Okay, so everything has been exported, and if you look over here in the catalog dropdown, added by previous export is a real quick way to get right to the collection of images that you wanted. Select all those, and I generally flag them. If I go to the actual images, you'll see that it says 1 of 2, 1 of 2. That is the expanded stack. So if you go into any of these and hit the S key, it'll collapse the stack. And again, this is just creating literally a virtual stack. So if I select all and export, it's only going to take what's on top of the stack. It's really handy. Okay, so I've got all the JPEGs. Now, what is mastering? Mastering is an additional layer of processing on top of the JPEG file. That's it. That's all it is. And you'll notice something really fascinating. The files react totally different, which makes sense, especially if you do any color shifts. You're working in a lossy format. So this is actually a critical detail to pick up on. Make sure you are always exporting at JPEG 100 and then re-importing JPEG 100, because you don't want to be, because JPEG is a lossy format, you don't want to be editing on top of it and then export again at anything less than JPEG 100, or you could be getting a noticeable degradation in quality. So that's it. Now I actually have a separate preset specifically for mastering. I'll post that and link it in the group. But I just want to play with a couple of concepts here, specifically with the tone curve and saturations. So if I add another simple S curve with a little bit of fade, you'll see that it's much more what's the word, noticeable. It creates any type of tone curve play that you do. You are working now with a JPEG file, of course, and it's creating almost like a softer feel to the images in a way that I just find very pleasing. I'm just going to edit a few of these with the same preset to see how it looks. Boom. Now, the way that I discovered like the sort of benefit in doing this, I actually shot RAW plus JPEG. And when I imported them, all the JPEGs were on top, stacked virtually on top of the RAW files. And I started editing, not realizing that. And my same starting point preset looked good, but really different in a way. And as I started to correct for white balance, they just weren't giving me the latitude of change that I would normally expect to get to while correcting. And in some photos, it looked amazing. I was like, what is going on here? Maybe, was it the light? Was it the camera in some weird way? And I finally realized, oh my gosh, I'm editing the JPEGs. And again, on some of them it looked amazing. On others, the white balance was so far off that there was no saving it to making it look decent. And you also have a lot less flexibility with dynamic range most of the time when you're editing a JPEG file. So it's so important to always capture in RAW. But it's just another layer of cohesion between what you're doing editing the RAW files and then what your final gallery is going to have. A lot of people, if you've ever heard of a photographer talk about alien skin exposure. Oh, and by the way, this particular image, I do have a deconstruction coming very soon. This is a captured in camera effect. This is I have the raw file somewhere here. But yeah, I'll walk through exactly what's happening in this double exposure in another post. But I love the look of applying an additional, it doesn't have to be nearly as heavy as your preset for your raw files, and it is an annoying layer of complication to have to like edit again. That does seem sort of redundant, but it does add a nice consistent layer to everything that you're creating. And I mean, as you can see here, this looks very pleasing to me. Let me go to the folder in library. Let me go to the raw file with the original edit. So it just tightens everything up a little bit. This is maybe a little too extreme, but for demonstration purposes, I hope you're understanding what I'm getting at. Now, where I talked about a lot of photographers may be doing this already without even knowing it is with alien skin exposure. So this has been a very popular piece of software for years, probably for a decade, and it's kind of been kept on the DL. for whatever reason, a lot of photographers don't like to talk about it explicitly. But I'm going to open it up, and I actually have an additional set of presets that I've built specifically for alien skin exposure. And what a lot of people like in alien skin is what it does to the reds and the overlays, the gradient overlays you can add. But what they, I think, really are enjoying is the fact that they have their raw edit and then they edit the JPEG in alien skin exposure. And you can get a very great, sometimes better and very similar look by still editing the JPEG just in Lightroom again. But a lot of people like the, here's why alien skin exposure is very popular. You can just add in and drop like gradient light effects and move them around in post. And it gets, very touchy in terms of like, that's not really an in-camera effect anymore. So you have to use your own measure of taste for how far you want to take that. But I do have a couple of additional presets that I use specifically adjusting color, temperature, and an additional tone curve. So you can see it's just a very light sort of warming up of everything, specifically in alien skin. I also have one in Lightroom that I'm actually liking even more these days. So that's it. That is the concept of mastering your images. You take your entire collection of raw images, edit it as close to perfect and exactly where you want as you possibly can, export that entire batch, edit that entire batch of JPEGs. You could even create an action to just batch edit all of them with the exact same preset, because mastering presets need to be sort of that final 5% of pixie dust. It doesn't need to be huge color correction swings in editing. It doesn't have to be huge exposure swings in editing. Just a light new tone curve, maybe some saturation and color adjustments, very light, and that's it. I'm going to include my preset for those for free in this post, and I hope you all get a lot out of that and enjoy playing around. I encourage you to make your own. Start naming it that. This concept should really be lifted from the audio world and put right into the photography world, because it's the exact same mechanics and process. Again, sound engineers have always used to give their songs a cohesion. You know, when you're editing and mixing music, 12 tracks for a record, they come out at all variety of different overall volume levels. Bass and treble tends to get a little bit too high in one song and not in the next. Mastering levels all that out and just gives it a cohesion. Same exact thing should apply in your full galleries. Speaking of which, I also got permission from my last wedding that I shot on New Year's to do a walkthrough of the full gallery of their wedding. He is actually here in the Patreon group. I photographed his wedding over New Year's with the Canon EOS R, and I just want to show and critique an entire full gallery. I have that post coming up again soon. A lot of stuff coming in April. Thank you so much. Any questions in the comments, and of course I'll have a bunch more in the article that goes along with this video. But thank you so much for your attention. Have a good day.